Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Today we're in conversation with Professor Srinath Reddy. He's president of the Public Health Foundation India and also a member of the ICMR Task Force on COVID. Welcome back, Professor Reddy. We are really in the middle of the second wave, something that we've been talking about. But how bad are things currently?
Well, obviously, we are seeing a fair amount of rise in cases in some parts of the country, while other parts of the country are fortunately showing some stabilization. The deaths will certainly continue to rise because there is a lag period between the case count and the death count. But I would say that much of the country is still under threat and therefore needs to protect itself. And our main concern at this point in time is not only to bring the large cities and the bigger metros under control, but also to ensure that the smaller towns and the rural areas now which have opened up for the virus can also be protected to the extent possible, not only from the transmission, but also particularly from providing appropriate and needed healthcare in a timely fashion.
But I'm reading that cases are coming down. So, have we peaked, or is there some more? We are seeing about 4.5 lakh deaths, cases. Sorry, still currently. Do you think the number will rise, or do you think the number will go down in the next week?
We are seeing some fluctuation in the numbers, but I believe there is firstly a regional variation that we will see. The areas of India, particularly the large cities, which commenced the second wave earlier, are likely to see a downturn earlier than those parts of India which started the second wave later. So you're going to see multiple waves basically merging into each other over a period of time. But if you take the all India numbers, the modeling that has been done by different people suggests that somewhere in about a week or so, we should start seeing the downturn, or at least the plateau, continuing. And also that the deaths would follow about 2 to 3 weeks later. But it has been suggested that given the height of the wave, the crest of the wave, even the plateau would be long drawn. It won't be a steep descent. So we'll have to brace ourselves for some more time to see still a fairly large case count and also a large death count, even if the decline is going to be a sign of encouragement.
And so that means you would suggest further lockdown. A lot of people are saying that maybe another week and then we can open up, but that doesn't seem advisable from what you are saying.
See, the question is whether we want to call it a full lockdown or a considerable restriction of movement so as to contain transmission. I mean, that is a choice that we have to make. I've always said that what we need is coordinated countrywide containment with some variations on the theme. There will be parts of the country where the case count would be coming down and in a stable fashion. And to prolong the lockdown there would not be wise, both from the point of view of the people as well as from the point of view of whatever economic recovery is going to be attempted. But that doesn't mean that they should remain exposed, because all of them are not vaccinated, obviously, not all of them are infected. They still are vulnerable to infection coming from other regions. So we have to look at travel restrictions apart from some other restrictions. The super spreader events should certainly be out. We should not permit people to meet in ill-ventilated areas. And even in open areas, I think there should be substantial crowd restrictions. And even in areas which are going into lockdown or near lockdown, we should permit a few hours where you could say Section 144 can be imposed, not more than 5 people can gather, but essential purchases should be permitted. And for the poor who are losing their income, particularly the daily wages and others, we ought to provide relief packages, both in terms of nutrition, but also other essential goods. What was called the Kasaragod model of Kerala during the first wave, where actually during the lockdown, the police went house to house and handed over food packets and other essential goods. That is the kind of humanitarian approach we need to take. Odisha is doing that very well too, apart from Kerala. So these are some of the models we should pick up. So I do not think we can wrap the entire country in one blanket. On the other hand, we should have adequate coordination so that we don't see spillover from the regions which are still active into the regions which are quietening down.
That makes sense, but unfortunately, a lot of the teachers and police force that have been deployed for Panchayat polls, for Kumbh Mela, they are also down. So that's an ill-conceived move that has led to key people being down.
Well, that is why this is absolutely the time to ensure that there is citizen participation. Community-based organizations, NGOs, citizen volunteers, and what are we doing with all the results of NSS and NCC that we have? Well-trained people who are supposed to be disciplined. Even during the first wave, I had called that they should be brought in as auxiliaries. We have actually neglected the citizen connect during the first wave, thinking that we could manage entirely through the police and paramilitary forces, which is incorrect. Not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of the confidence that people will display when they're approached by the police. So I think this is the time when the NGOs and other community-based organizations need to be brought in much more so that the local voices of comfort and confidence will prevail.
I think that is an excellent suggestion, in fact, and people are doing it individually, but a concerted attempt coordinated attempt would go a longer way. Now about the vaccination program, Professor, we've seen, people are running short of vaccines. Today there has been announcement of new procurement, but where are we actually in terms of vaccinations?
Well, there's no doubt that we have run short of vaccines for whatever reasons of planning the numbers and projections that were made. We have a definite vaccine shortage. I think that's partly because planning did not take into account that there could be a second wave, and certainly not one of this ferocity. And therefore, the going around for vaccines at this stage is not going to be immediately productive beyond what we can get from the Russian vaccine and possibly some diverted AstraZeneca vaccines and vaccines stocks from other countries. But for Pfizer and Moderna to come in, it's going to take a little while because the rest of the world is also vying for them and trying to purchase them. But in a couple of months' time, we should be seeing more vaccines coming into the supply chain because we are now running through a number of clinical trials. And I hope at least some of them, if not all of them, will be successful. And that should be able to ramp up our production and fill our supply chain. But for the next 2 or 3 months, we have to be fairly judicious in who we prioritize and how we provide the protection to the most vulnerable people. And therefore, this ambition of vaccinating everybody from 18 upwards may have to be shelved till we have larger vaccine stocks and focus on the really vulnerable people above 45 and those under 45 with comorbidities.
Yeah, that's the thing. Should the preference be given to the first dose or people who need a second dose?
Well, there has been some change in the government policy, it appears. They have now said that people who have received Covishield can actually get it 12 to 16 weeks after the first dose. So that sort of helps to spread out a bit for the second dose. But even at that point in time, the people who are getting the second dose must be prioritized because the people who are getting the second dose are the most vulnerable people because they're 45 and above and have comorbidities. Our first duty is to protect them. And of course, if we, in the meanwhile, have the luxury of larger supply, then we can even come down the age bracket. But I think we must plan our stock position in such a manner that the people who are truly vulnerable to severe disease are not disadvantaged by being deprived of the second dose when they need it.
Of the new vaccinations, which one are you most hopeful about? The nasal one, I think biotech is getting a lot of publicity.
Well, I believe the nasal one has theoretical advantages, which I really hope will translate into practical benefit. But till the trials are completed, we'll still have to keep our fingers crossed. But I believe even the other vaccines could possibly hold promise. Like, for example, the viral subparticle vaccine that is being made. And that has been recently, I've read a report that internationally another vaccine of that kind has claimed a tremendous amount of benefit, both in terms of efficacy against severe infection, but also in cutting down the transmission rates. This is a report from Australia. So we'll have to wait and see how some of these vaccines will really actually translate into practical benefit other than theoretical constructs at this stage.
But, you said that over 45 should be given preference with comorbidities. But the new, this wave or this mutation in the virus is attacking the younger people a lot. People who are healthy with no comorbidities are, just being struck down. And so isn't that a worry that it's not following the old rules?
No, when we have shortage of vaccines or a limited supply, let me put it more diplomatically, we have to prioritize the people at greater risk. If we have the luxury of an abundant supply, of course we must vaccinate everybody. Why only 18? If the trials come through, we should even go up to age of 5. But when we have a limited supply, you have to triage the need and say who is at greater risk. And there is no doubt, if you take all the data globally and in India, not only the first wave, but also the second wave, the people above 45 and the people under 45 with comorbidities are at the greatest risk. It is true that some others under the age of 45 who do not have manifest comorbidities are also having severe disease, and unfortunately, some of them are succumbing. But if you take the proportions are much higher in the traditionally identified high-risk groups. So we cannot afford to deviate from that principle. If the supplies are short, if the supplies are abundant, fine, let's go ahead and vaccinate as many people as possible. So that is where, and in any case, what is happening is that some of the people under 45 without comorbidities, younger people, are rushing into the private hospitals and getting themselves vaccinated. Of course, the people who can afford to get it are getting it, not everybody. The poorer kids are not getting it. How do you know that they are not vulnerable? So we have to correct some of these distortions, but as long as the government has the handle, then we must ensure that the people who have the highest risk must be prioritized by the government programs, whether it is a central government program or a state government program.
Fair enough. I also wanted to talk to you about the, this post-COVID complication, the black fungus that, we are seeing a lot of cases on the rise. Not so many in the first round, but now we are seeing a whole lot of cases on the rise. What causes this and what can be done to prevent it?
It's extremely unfortunate. It has multiple causes. Firstly, let's look at who are more likely to get it. And then secondly, what could be the potential source of that? The people who are more likely to get it are people who have a lowered immunity, maybe because of diabetes, for example, or those who are on any other chemotherapy that is reducing their immunity. India, unfortunately, we have a very large proportion of people, even at younger ages, who have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. And they also have other conditions which reduce their immunity, or they may be taking drugs which reduce their immunity. Now, and the conditions in which we are also seeing this happen much more often now is because there are drugs which reduce immunity, and these drugs are particularly steroids in the context of COVID. Because in the first wave, not many people were on steroids because the information that came from the recovery trial that steroids reduce severe disease and death in people in intensive care who are on oxygen or on ventilators came in the second half of the year. So by the time it got translated into standard management guidelines, it took a little while. But subsequently, it's being used quite a lot, extensively. And in the second wave, we are seeing extensive use of steroids, even earlier than needed. Normally, you should not use it till about 5 days or at least a week, because the initial period you're giving your body's immunity time to fight back. It is only when that immunity is either subdued or, more importantly, when that immunity actually goes rogue by having a hyperimmune response and starts hurting the body itself, then you start adding steroids to reduce the inflammation and to reduce the hyperimmune response. So if you do not restrict it to people who are really requiring it, like people in intensive care on oxygen or on ventilators, but use it ad lib to everybody and start too early, you are reducing the body's immunity when the body really requires to fight back with its immunity in the first week. And secondly, you're using it too frequently in almost everybody now. So it is the misuse of steroids which is causing a huge problem. And steroids actually upset the blood sugars. People who are pre-diabetic start becoming diabetic. People who are diabetic start getting their diabetes aggravated. So you're again giving the fungus a good chance to grow. So these are some of the reasons. The other drug that has been used also and misused is tocilizumab.
Professor Reddy, before the break, you were talking about the misuse of certain drugs. I think that's a very important conversation. So we talked about steroids, but you mentioned some other drugs also.
Well, tocilizumab is one of the drugs that has been shown again in the recovery trial to be beneficial in saving lives. But that is only useful in a very, very small subset of patients, and it is a very toxic drug. I mean, even the drug that is used for treating this black fungus is a very toxic drug. And tocilizumab plays havoc with your body's immunity. It can flare up your tuberculosis, which might have been lying latent. So there are many problems with tocilizumab. It should be used, again, very cautiously in an intensive care setting, according to standard guidelines. But if you start throwing it around, like many private practitioners have been doing, essentially because they want to give something to their patient and show that they're doing some a great service, then your misuse of steroids and tocilizumab can actually come back to bite you with all kinds of complications, including the black fungus.
And also in vitamin, I think that also there's some confusion as to whether we have a Goa health minister saying that I'm going to give it like vaccination to everybody. I mean, that kind of theories are also a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Well, ivermectin has had a checkered course, and it's still shrouded in controversy globally in terms of its efficacy. While there is some theoretical rationale for its use, its use in clinical care of COVID patients has been extensively reported from Bangladesh, where doctors have claimed a very high rate of success with it, but not in controlled clinical trials. Subsequently, WHO examined the evidence and initially said there was no evidence, but then a number of people started using it in India, in private practice in particular, and even in the ICMR guidelines, the National Task Force guidelines, is being put as something with weak evidence for possible home care use. But now, given the amount of pressure that is being built up for endorsing this drug, I think WHO also has said that you can use it, but only as part of clinical trials. A recent meta-analysis, which combines multiple small trials across the world, suggests that there is benefit. So right now, the jury is out. There is no large trial without distortions of evidence that conclusively proves that this is very beneficial. But there is some suggestion it might be beneficial. And since it is a drug without much of side effects and harm, many people continue to use it. And that's the current status with a bit of question mark around it, but there is no cross mark against it.
What would your advice be? A lot of people who are getting COVID positive may not have access to, say, doctors and all. So initially, what would you say? Control your temperature with paracetamol, take an antibiotic, and wait it out rather than rushing for these fancy drugs?
Certainly not an antibiotic. I don't think we should misuse antibiotics because this is a viral drug. Antibiotic doesn't really do anything to viruses. It maximum treats secondary infection when there is evidence of secondary infection. So I would, on the other hand, if we take antibiotics, it breeds antibiotic resistance. And that's one of the worries about how COVID is being handled in private practice. So I would caution against that. When it's necessary, when there is evidence of secondary infection, yes, antibiotics should be used, but very sparingly and certainly not in general use. Now, the question, of course, is what do you do at home? Many people can actually benefit from home care, and majority of them do. People say it's 85% can actually benefit from home, but let's say even 80% benefit from home care. The idea is check your temperature, take plenty of fluids, make sure that you are taking adequate amount of nutritious food, But most important thing, monitor your oxygen and check whether you're feeling breathless in terms of your symptoms. If your oxygen levels stay at 94 or above consistently, then you seem to be fine. You can even take a 6-minute walk test. You can check your oxygen levels after walking for 6 minutes. And if the oxygen levels are not falling, that means your lungs are in reasonably good shape. There may be a few patches in your lungs, but that means your lung function is still good, and those patches will not impede your recovery. Now, if your oxygen starts falling, then that is the time to get concerned, or particularly if you're feeling very breathless, then it's time to get concerned, and then consult a doctor for possibly going to the hospital. Now, whether any medicine should be used, there is some suggestion that a drug called budesonide, which is a steroid inhaler, can be used after 5 days. That seems, according to some small trials in the UK, to cut short the recovery time. But whether it should be used in general is not at all clear. Large trials are needed. But it again has been put in with a sort of inverted commas as a potential use for home, even in the ICMR guidelines. So it is that which can be used. But the most important thing is, if you're feeling breathless, make sure that you're first lying on your tummy rather than on your back, and see whether the oxygen levels are improving with what's called groaning. If that is not improving and your oxygen levels are continuing to fall low, then of course it's time to consult a doctor and then go to the hospital. As far as the other medicines at home are concerned, I think if you're taking a good amount of fluids, nutritious food, getting good sleep, well, if you want to take vitamins, go ahead and take it. There's no proof of benefit. But antibiotics, certainly not, unless there is evidence of secondary infection.
Thank you, doctor. That's very practical advice, because a lot of people are having, they're just following a WhatsApp forward which says, start your antibiotic immediately, paracetamol, and then steroids after 5 days. So I'm glad to have this.
Yeah, both All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is making the guidelines for ICMR, and the WHO would wring their hands if they see such advice. Because one of the biggest problems that we have had in the past, and which is there even now, is that for viral diseases, if you start using antibiotics which are meant against bacteria, then you actually create antibiotic resistance. If there is clear-cut evidence or high suspicion of secondary bacterial infection, yes, not otherwise.
And should the COVID recovered patients, in terms of vaccination, what should they do? People are saying they should wait for 6 months before their vaccination, whether it's a first dose or a second dose.
Well, I think these recommendations have started changing. Previously, if you saw, they said wait for 2 weeks and then get it done, because you're not sure how immune you're going to be, because your vaccine itself is going to give you strong immunity, whereas your infection would have had a variable viral load, and you do not know how long the antibodies will last, whether they last for 3 months or 6 months. But now I think, because there is a constraint of vaccine supply, there is a suggestion that you could wait it out and then have it so that others could have their turn first. Now, that is a bit of a controversial area. I do not think we have sufficient scientific evidence to say we should defer it, but certainly if we want to vaccinate as many people and try and get the benefit of at least the first dose, then this appears to be a practical way of looking at it.
Before I let you go, doctor, what about the third wave? I mean, we haven't even finished with the second wave, but there's talk about a third one. That's very worrying.
Well, I look at it this way, that let's first deal with the second wave with competence and confidence, and let's put an end to it. But the lessons that we are learning from the second wave and the systems we are building up now should last us in good stead if we do have a third wave. And third waves are likely to happen, because not only the virus is not going to go away completely, the whole world is not vaccinated in order to reduce the risk of large-scale viral transmission. Secondly, we are going to get variants, and the variants also will cause some degree of fresh infections. And there are large parts of this country which will not have been infected or vaccinated. in the next few months. So we will have to brace ourselves. But the main thing is to try and reduce the transmission and accelerate the vaccination. So I don't think we should start expending our mental energy and our system efficiency right now planning for the third wave without dealing competently with the second wave. But we should keep this in mind that and this must build in not like dismantling all the temporary hospitals that we set up after the first wave, which now we are again setting up again. So we should not close the shop prematurely.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.